Support for WUWM podcasts comes from Bliffert Lumber, family-owned and operated for over 120 years. Bliffert serves contractors and homeowners across Milwaukee and southeastern Wisconsin. Learn more at bliffertlumber.com.
From Apuant Productions and WUWM, this is Classic Eats. For this episode of Classic Eats, I connect with Michael Gebert. Gebert is a food writer and the creator of the podcast and blog Sky Full of Bacon, and author of The Chicago Way, a book of curated interviews with chefs chronicling Chicago's ascendancy as a culinary capital. It's author Michael Gebert and all things delicious in Chicago on this episode of Classic Eats. But first, a story. There is a particular kind of American story that begins not with ambition, but with inevitability. With a child born so close to an idea that the idea becomes, before he can articulate it, his entire world. Grant Achatz grew up in St. Clair, Michigan, a small town of 3,000 on the thumb of the state, where his parents and grandparents ran diners. The clatter of a short-order kitchen was his nursery rhyme. The smell of a griddle at 6 in the morning was for him what birdsong was for everyone else. You, Grant Achatz, are 19 and enroll at the Culinary Institute of America. You already know that the family diner legacy is not what you came here to do. You graduate and head to Chicago's Charlie Trotter's, where the chef in the kitchen treats cooking as a loving argument. But the fit isn't right. The culture, the hierarchy, something you can't quite name, and after less than 6 months, you walk away. Not in defeat, but in the particular clarity that comes from knowing, bone deep, that there is somewhere else you need to be. You go west to Thomas Keller's French Laundry in Napa, the most celebrated kitchen in the country, and the one that will actually hold you. You rise to sous chef in 2 years, then spend a year away from the cooking line entirely, working the harvest at La Jota Vineyard up on Howell Mountain, learning what it means to watch, ferment, and wait. Then, for weeks only, you stage at El Bulli in Spain, and Ferran Andreas shows you something you have no word for yet, that food, taken far enough, can produce not just pleasure, but genuine wonder. You return to Chicago at 26 and take over a Trio in Evanston. In the early 2000s, Trio is one of the most closely watched kitchens in the country, a space where serious food people make the pilgrimage to the suburbs to dine. The awards come fast, but more important is the night that a derivatives trader named Nick Kokonis comes in for dinner. He thinks in abstracts, in the radically undervalued. He understands immediately what you are doing and finds you after the meal. A friendship deepens into a shared conviction, and when you tell him what you actually want to build, he doesn't flinch. Alinea opens in May 2005 in a gray brick building in Lincoln Park, just around the corner from where Charlie Trotter's stood for nearly 25 years. An invisible baton had been passed. Alinea has no sign out front, no marquee. 64 seats, 18 courses. You speak not of flavor profiles, but of feelings. Nostalgia, surprise, tension, joy. Within a year, Gourmet calls it the best restaurant in America. You are 31 years old. Then the diagnosis, stage 4 cancer of the tongue. It is a raw, tragic irony. The surgery that could save your life would cost you the ability to taste. You refuse it. You endure chemotherapy and radiation, lose your sense of taste entirely and keep working. Then, improbably, you get it back. Alinea earns 3 Michelin stars and sustains them every year since. How could you know that from your parents' Michigan diner, you would take your place in the culinary lineage of Chicago? A lineage that began with the bakery in the 1960s and was heaved forward by chefs like Bayless, Tramonto, Trotter, and Kahan. That your loving argument about cuisine that cultivates feelings, would become the preeminent statement in the story of the Chicago Way. Welcome to Classic Eats. I'm Kyle Johnson Cherek. This is a show about culinary history, why we eat what we eat, the people, the places, the scenes and situations that set the course for the way we dine. Each show we pick a thing, a person, a drink, a movement, or an object that made its mark on what we call food. Today, I'm talking to food writer Michael Gebert about the book The Chicago Way, a book about the evolution of Chicago's culinary scene. First of all, you start in this wonderful period about 63 with Louis Salsame, a Hungarian. Right. But it goes from 63 to practically yesterday with Achatz and Phil Foss and some of those other folks. And but there's a couple of things that really stepped out to me. Chicago, there was a lot of undervalued real estate that New York or other cities didn't have.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it, is there was always another neighborhood to move to and to kind of conquer fresh and turn into a hot restaurant neighborhood. And one of the things that comes out of that is the fact that, all these tasting menus we have, you could do that because these restaurants, they weren't paying so much for their space that they had to turn the table at least once. They could keep you there for 3.5 hours doing weird magic tricks for you, and that was okay. Yep. That was part of the fun.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's still going to be the case.
Well, let's talk about that, because I always thought it was such irony that Chicago's restaurant scene, in a big way, aside from the bakery in Lincoln Park back in the 60s, really started in a suburb, northwestern suburb, 40 miles away from Wrigley Field, just as a point for listeners, and a 25-minute drive in Wheeling, Illinois, which most people, unless you live in Chicagoland, have never heard of. Wheeling. Yet one of the best French restaurants in America at that time, and not for like a flash in the pan for like a weekend or 2 years, but for many years was there.
And the idea of having, a very fancy French restaurant there where people would spend 5 hours eating dinner seemed really strange. I think, that was one of the questions that I wanted to explore, was when did it come back to the city and when did it stop being out in the suburbs?
And so if I could, for our listeners, so that was Jean Banchet and La Française out in Wheeling. And then the Licciones worked for him, and it was still very much, to your point, it was out there in a Midwestern setting where you had roadhouses and big restaurants you could see from the highway. And so was River North, that area in Chicago, and Gordon Sinclair and Gordon's and things like that, would you say that was really when the Chicago Way came downtown and started to have a footprint in the city? Yeah,
it really was. I mean, the bakery existed in Lincoln Park, but kind of nothing else did. I mean, it's not like 5 other restaurants clustered around the bakery or anything. It was actually, it was Al Friedman who had sort of inherited some of these derelict Victorian buildings in that area from his father. And he thought, restaurants would make people come to this area. And so, the first one was Gordon. And, there's just a lot of things about it. It was in the right place at the right time, for sure. It was, this kind of trendy, New York, hip, clearly gay restaurant that got this big ladies who lunch crowd. Yeah. There's a story that Rick Bayless tells when they opened Frontera Grill around there. People are like, is it safe to go to your restaurant? And they're like, well, we're catty-cornered from Gordon. Okay, I guess it'll be all right. We won't die.
Right. But, so I don't want to gloss over anybody, and it is your book, so please fill in where you feel it's important. But I do want to talk about how there's before Trotter and there's after Trotter.
Yeah, I think that's really true. I mean, not that Trotter is the only one who did a lot of these things. I mean, I always point to Michael Foley as sort of Trotter before Trotter, because he was a young chef trying to do, who had experience of French food but wanted to do an American version of it.
Charlie Trotter was, one, extraordinary chef, two, succinct vision that never deviated, ever, and just a freaking workhorse. Right. And then I think one of the best showmen that Chicago has ever had in the food space.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's no doubt of that. He understood, how to make people interested in his restaurant, how to get taken seriously, in Europe when he would go and visit. Larry Stone talks about, the first time they went kind of getting blown off, but by the second time they went, everybody knew who he was. So,
right.
But yeah, I think he was very savvy, and he also had the fortune of having a family fortune behind him, to be able to promote what he was doing. I mean, I don't think the restaurant ever made money.
Right. Well, and he fits every sort of central casting, temperamental, artistic, only at his standards, almost, what am I trying to, like a, almost bipolar personality aspects and behavior. And I mean that in all sincerity, but in humbly, but in truth.
Fortunately, you keep digging at them, and sooner or later you get a fairly horrifying story of something that happened in the kitchen. Right. But yeah, I think people, the ones who, survived it, got a lot out of it. The interesting thing is how few of them wound up opening Trotter-style restaurants. A lot of them
so perfectly put.
They kind of aimed for something more casual.
My guest today is Michael Gebert. He is the author of The Chicago Way, a book that profiles, through the chef's own words, the ascendancy of Chicago as a culinary capital. To your point, Achatz, I don't really consider him a protege of Trotter's because he worked there for such a short period of time.
Kind of rejected
Trotter
him.
Essentially told him, you're dead. You're dead to me if you leave. Don't even use my name. But others that went through there, from Graham Elliott's Bistro and really exploring Midwestern food in a molecular way. Like there's so many other. Everybody basically scattered once the lights went on and they left. Yeah. Another part of the story, though, let's move into some of the other ethnic cuisines, and by that I mean what Spiaggia recommend. And by that I mean what's, for instance, Spiaggia represented for Chicago and the rest of the country, or what Rick Bayless did and some of the other folks that are in the book, and then some of the amazing female chefs that it's stupid that we even say female chefs. But I believe there's a certain aspect of Chicago that allowed them to quote Sinatra, make it there versus anywhere else.
I put the chapter that talks about Spiaggia and Tony Mantuano, and then Rick Bayless and Frontera Grill. Put that right after Trotter, because I think in a lot of ways they're kind of the anti-Trotters. They wanted, first of all, they wanted to work with basically a peasant cuisine, and they were both interested in obtaining things locally. Both had similar programs of sending people to the home country to experience what they saw as the right way to do it. So, I felt like there were just a lot of parallels between the two of them as really influential figures, besides the fact that, both their restaurants and Trotter all sort of opened within this fairly short period in the mid-'80s.
I was going to say I didn't do them, but it's like within three or four years. Yeah, it really popped, right?
Right, and so, that was important. As far as the women chefs, it's interesting. At first, a lot of them took over places that they had worked. Mary Beth Liccioni owned Les Nomades, and she had been at Le Francais as well. Carrie Nahabedian opened Naha in the second place where Gordon had been after Gordon, retired. So, there is a very clear way in which they're sort of taking the place over and making it their own.
Well, no, yeah. We really don't care. Maybe I'm doing a big broad, but we really don't care. And I would go back to Bill Kim, etc. We don't care what ethnicity you are, what your background is, where you came from. And if you can cook and you have the chutzpah to open a place. And I think that happened in Chicago in a different way, with the press like you supporting them and the public supporting their food and things like that in a different way. I think that's part of the Chicago way than in other cities.
Yeah, I think that's true. I remember reading something once where somebody was saying, in New York, it's about how much money you come from. In Boston, it's about your family. But in Chicago, it's, where did you work? And I feel, that was a lot of it. It's one of the reasons I talk so much about one-off hospitality in restaurants like Blackbird and Avec, because to me,
you just went where I was going to go.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that is the training ground in Chicago. So many people came out of those restaurants, even if they're only there for a year or two. There's a, sort of farm to table, simple direct food ethos that is so central. I always say that, the most important Chicago restaurant outside of Chicago is Alinea, but the most important Chicago restaurant in Chicago was Blackbird because of the people who worked there and went on to their own place.
I have so many, and some have passed too soon, but dear friends that went through Paul Kahn and Donnie Medea's experience. And to me, what that whole group represented was almost a respectful record scratch of what was going on in Chicago at the time. And, across the dining scene, I mean, the temerity of Avec with the style of food and the interior,
right,
where you're walking into this, Scandinavian tube.
Yeah.
And you're pushed with the fellow Chicago diners and then the rest of their ventures. I really think, to your point, if one-off hadn't come along, the Chicago dining scene would be, I still think, still robust, but it would be, it wouldn't have the backbeat.
Right.
Like if you have a great song and you remove the bass and percussion, there's still a melody, but it doesn't have the richness.
Yeah.
So where did Chicago go after, as I said before, the Trotter before and after? Obviously, we have the Frontera Grill and Spiaggia's, and we're doing short shrift to a lot of other great restaurants.
There's a whole book people can read if they want more. So.
Yeah, and you've got Let Us Entertain You moving along and opening up concepts and doing their thing, and I don't want to, not give the nod to them. But from Alinea forward, there's a real shift as well. Can you talk about that?
I mean, I think the big thing is that food got more casual. And to me, at the same time, what was happening out in the neighborhoods was places like the Bristol that were doing, real farm to table, nose to tail cooking. Again, pretty peasant food-ish, but bringing that to all over the city, creating hot areas like Logan Square. And that was just, to me, that's still kind of the story of what's happening.
Yeah, and you hit on the head of what I also felt is a big part of the Chicago way. The story is that Alinea happened and it became one of the best restaurants in the world, and wonderful, marvelous. And you have Homaro Canto doing what he did at Moto, and I mean, these are major things, and Phil Foss and that sort of stuff. But really, the trend was, as you said, this nose-to-tail, more casual, very rustic, very off-fall, easy-to-peasant food. And those are the places, and Jason Hamill's approach at Lula and things like that, those are the places that have endured, and I don't mean just from a dollar and cents way, but that people still go back to and want to go back to. And
yeah, I mean, Lula is such a defines its neighborhood so much.
Yeah. So everybody, when they interview you, probably asks, where do you think food's going in Chicago? And honestly, I don't care. But I am curious, Mike, what surprised you in researching or interviewing and doing this book?
The story that was kind of new to me, just because, I hadn't known them that much and didn't know that much of their inside story, was Rick Tremonto and Gail Gand, who had,
friends, lovely people.
They were Trio up in Evanston, which Grant Achatz eventually went to. They were True, which was one of Lettuce Entertainer's very fancy restaurants. I kind of, as I was writing it, I put at the beginning that they were really sort of at the head of two trends that have been important. On the one hand, the sort of theatricality that you get with Grant Achatz and people like that. They were doing that with, serving food on, painters' palettes, that they had picked up at an art store and stuff like that.
Tiles at Home Depot, yeah.
Right. They were ingenious about what they could serve on, and that became part of their thing. But the other part, I said that because particularly Tremonto had worked in places that were butchering on site and stuff like that, that they, a lot of the later chefs like Chris Pendell of the Bristol got experience in that working for Tremonto at True or somewhere.
Well, listen, buddy, I go back to Carl Sandburg. I mean, hog butcher of the world, tool maker, stacker of wheat, player of railroads, and the nation's freight handler.
Yeah. They were
stormy husky brawling.
Hog butchering, for sure. So.
Yeah, it comes through whether they want to escape it or not.
Yeah.
Well, this has been great. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
That's our show. Thanks for taking a seat at our table for this episode of Classic Eats. Would you please?
I'm here for it. Let's go.
Okay.
In 5, 4, 3.
Now I've got the giggles.
Classic Eats is created and hosted by Kyle Johnson Cherek and co-produced by Apuan Productions and WUWM.
Executive producers Kyle Johnson Cherek and Rob Schoonover. Audio editing and engineering by Brian Arkta and John Rymaszewski.
Special thanks again to our guest, Michael Gebert. You can hear this episode again and any others you've missed when you subscribe to Classic Eats, found wherever you listen to your podcasts.